What is the best option to make pie cherries shelf stable? Freeze drying or home bottling? Hi, I'm Kylene and I'm the Provident Prepper. We like to have as much of our food supply as we can in a shelf-stable form for a couple of reasons. One, food that is refrigerated or frozen doesn't have a very long shelf life. And the second reason is that during a power outage, all of those foods are at risk. We purchased this bucket of frozen cherries from a local farmer. So we're excited. They're pie cherries and they come all pitted and ready to go. Normally, all we would do is take these pie cherries and bottle them, and then they would be shelf stable and be good for 3 years or so. Sometimes we stretch that a little bit longer. But this year we decided, now that we have the freeze dryer, to actually compare. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna freeze dry part of these cherries and we're gonna bottle the rest of them. Freeze dried foods tend to have a much longer shelf life of about 25 years. But quality matters a lot. Okay. So let's get going and see what we think. Preparing the freeze-dried pie cherries was incredibly easy. I just pulled them out of the bag and spread them out on these trays. They're kind of in a semi-frozen state now. They've been a little bit thawed, otherwise it would have been in this big brick, but they're still pretty frozen. Okay, so we have our frozen cherries all in the bottles. I've got pints and I've got quarts, just for convenience sake, because sometimes I'm feeding more people and sometimes I just need a little bit. Now, sour cherries can be bottled with either plain water, sugar, or fruit juice. And in our case, because we have family members who don't eat any refined sugar, I'm gonna put just a little bit of honey in each jar, because we can always add more sweetener later, but the sweetener kind of helps it just taste better, I think, personally. So we'll be putting a little bit of honey in each one of these jars, and then we will fill them with water, and we will put the lids on them and get them in the water bath canner.
This is pie cherries that we're just finishing. This took 4,054 minutes, so going on for 3 days, but it probably was done much earlier in the evening. It took 30.37 kilowatt hours, so substantially more than a normal batch. So these are dried out. You can see that they just kind of snap.
Okay, so we just took the pie cherries out of the freeze dryer, and we've also got all these beautiful jars of cherries that we bottled with just a little bit of honey in them. So now it's time to just test these pie cherries. They're nice and dry. Ooh, very pie cherry-like.
Yeah, very tart.
But they're actually really good, other than being really tart.
They make great pies.
Yeah, they're nice and dry. I'm really pleased with the way that they turned out. They're a little bit stuck, but not bad. Pie cherries in a bottle are a wonderful way to go. But here we're limited on our shelf life to 3 to 5 years, right? If we push it. Officially, I think it's supposed to be a year, but we keep it longer than that in our storage. But this is awesome and it's all ready to go. We're gonna package these for long-term storage, and they should be good in our storage for about 25 years, as long as they're in a cool place. So let's get packaging. It's really important that we don't have anything that might compromise the seal on this. And so I like to wipe it off just to make sure, because it's really important that we get a really good tight seal and that oxygen absorber can do its job in order for this to stay good in long-term storage. Once we zip the bag closed, then we're going to use the impulse sealer and just seal the top of it. I always like to do it twice just to make sure that I've got it nice and sealed and there's no problem with it. Seal looks good.
Those 4 trays of freeze-dried cherries produced 4 quart bags, 2 pint bags, 1 pint bottle, and some for us to rehydrate, make a recipe with, and totally enjoy.
And now it's time to taste. We've rehydrated these pie cherries and they don't have any sweetener on them at all. But the pie cherries that we bottled have just a little tiny bit of honey, so I want to compare them. So these are still tart, nowhere near as tart as the dehydrated or the freeze-dried cherries were. Let's try this. They look really good. Like, there's not a real big difference in the appearance. Well, these look a little cooked, which you would expect. So the freeze-dried pie cherries are definitely a little bit tartar, and it's almost, I don't want to say spongy. I don't quite know how to describe it.
Texture's not real bad, but
no, the texture's actually
just a little
pretty good,
bit different.
But it is just a little bit different. So now let's cook these up and see what we think about them once we make a recipe. I'm just gonna let these freeze-dried cherries rehydrate while I start the pie filling for the bottled cherries. To make the pie filling, I'm gonna start by just draining the juice into a pan, and we will add some sweetener and cornstarch to thicken this. I'm going to sweeten this with honey because I have a son who will not eat any refined sugar, but you can totally use white sugar in this if you'd like. Okay, once this is thickened, we're going to add the cherries back in. Oops. And then I'm actually going to stir it with a wooden spoon and not the whip anymore, just to incorporate that. Okay, we have our rehydrated freeze-dried cherries, and I'm just going to drain the water into the pan. Once it starts getting nice and thick like this, I'll let it boil for just 1 minute. The color of the sauce is not quite as intense with the freeze-dried cherries versus the bottled cherries, but if you look at the freeze-dried cherries, that's where the color still is. So once that's boiled for a minute, then I'll just take my cherries and dump them in. And I will use my wooden spoon to stir them because I don't want to mash them up. In comparing the pie filling, this is the traditional home bottled cherries, and they're just what I would expect. And then this is the freeze-dried cherries. The cherries actually maintain a really pretty color. There's no more color variation to this. Other than that, they really look quite similar. Okay, now we're gonna make the topping for the cherry crisp. I put all the dry ingredients inside the blender except for the oats because I want them to be whole. I don't want them to be turned into oat flour. You can find the recipe for this in the description of the video, but we change things up a lot because of dietary preferences. Now, normally I would put butter in here, but I'm going to put olive oil in because I have somebody in my family who can't have the milk. And I'm just gonna let this Vitamix do all the work. Just gonna dump those in for a second. turn it off. I'm going to finish mixing it by hand because I want the oats to maintain most of their original shape. Sometimes when you're just trying to use your food storage, you have to get a little bit creative. And in this case, we are using olive oil because of dietary restraints. But if you don't have butter and you're trying to use your food storage, oil can make all the difference between being able to have a recipe that you normally would love and not being able to make it at all. My personal preference would absolutely be butter, but sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. These are ready to go into the oven. This one in the glass pan with the ridges holds the freeze-dried cherries, and the one without, this is the traditional home-bottled cherries. We've just taken the Cherry Crisp out of the oven. This one is the freeze-dried, and this one is made with home-bottled cherries. So we're gonna see if we can tell the difference. Get your plate up, Johnny. That one is the home-bottled. And then this one is the freeze-dried. So let's see. Which one are you trying first?
Home bottled.
Okay, I'll try the home bottled first.
Delicious.
Really good.
Yeah, very, very
It's
good.
really good, especially for being a food storage recipe.
Right.
Because we made everything using shelf-stable ingredients. Okay. The one with freeze-dried cherries is really good. The cherries are just a little bit chewy.
Yeah, just a little. And maybe just a little more tart. Maybe.
Okay, so maybe I should have soaked them just a little bit longer. Actually, the texture's not bad. Like,
it's really good.
it's kind of nice for it to have a little bit of texture.
Yeah, it is. It's really good.
Score. The recipe will be in the description of this video. So, will you grab that bucket? Okay, this bucket we purchased from a local farmer who grew cherries. And we took that bucket and we were able to freeze dry and home bottle a whole bunch. Now the reason why we want to not keep it in our freezer is because that food has the shortest shelf life. Once we bottled it, we're getting 3 to 5 years. Once we freeze dried it and put it in these bags, we've got about 25 years, right?
Yeah.
So overall, what do you think about the difference, Daddy?
I think either one's really good. Both of these cobblers were very good. These can be a little snack food, although they are a little tart,
Really tart.
as they
Really,
are,
really
but
tart.
that's all right. I like tart things, so both turned out really well.
Okay, so now for the question of the day. What is your favorite recipe to use pie cherries in? Comment below. And thanks for being part of the solution.